Hi there, and welcome to another interview. And I've got the fantastic Dr. Sabrina Solt with me, and I'm going to ask her the question I ask everybody. Hey, Sabrina, why did you become carnivore?
Hey, Stephen. Well, thank you so much for having me on your channel, first of all. Interesting story. You've interviewed my husband, Zach. He was actually my motivation for becoming carnivore. He decided to dive into it after dealing with some personal health issues and whatnot. And I thought he was completely crazy. I actually first heard about carnivore it was 2017, because I was pregnant with my first daughter at the time, and or my first child. And so I heard about it on a podcast with Dr. Saladino and Dave Asprey. And I was like, this guy's bonkers. And then another thought that I had was, his last name literally says what he doesn't eat: salad. I know. And I just left it at that. I was like completely crazy, because I'm trained as a naturopathic doctor. And our whole curriculum basically through school is that plants are the best. You can use them as medicine. They should be food. They should be alternatives to everything. And so I wasn't ever personally vegetarian or vegan, but I would maintain a pretty, I will call it, plant heavy paleo diet. And so I kind of watched my husband switch over, and he's very intense, as you might know. And he kind of got introduced to this through Dr. Anthony Chaffee, who is very much like, meat, salt, water, do that, you're good to go. And so my husband's like, all right, I'm just going to do meat, salt, water. I'm like, you're going to die. And then he didn't. So I actually watched a progression for him really rapidly, where he was basically more pleasant to be around. He had a way more even mood. His skin cleared up. It wasn't bad before, but it just got brighter, clearer. Wrinkles started looking better. The whites of his eyes were whiter, and his poops were perfect, because we have one of those marriages where we just share and talk about that stuff. And I was like, you know what, maybe there's something to this. It's certainly not going to hurt me to try. I can track all my labs. I can, really pay attention to this stuff. And I got better too. So at that point, I had been dealing with gut issues for probably at least 2 decades of just terrible IBS, nothing that I did worked. And as a naturopathic doctor, I had access to every gut healing protocol you could possibly imagine from every natural company in existence. I do stem cell therapy in practice. I had stem cells done for this stuff, which did help, don't get me wrong, but it certainly wasn't curative, because, well, I was still eating all the things that were bothering it. I did peptides. I've done IV therapies. I tried everything for my gut. And it wasn't until I went carnivore that things actually finally improved in a really long-term, and I'll say permanent, but of course I'm still living my life, but in a really, really long-term, meaningful way for me, which also caused some skin issues to clear up. I would get these random breakouts on my chin every so often, also on other parts of my body too, which was super weird. I also had pretty severe anxiety that went away. Overall, it was and my chronic pain. Can't forget that. I don't even think about it anymore. I don't even actually remember how much pain I was in, because it's gone now. My upper back, my neck, I would self-inject. I would sit there in my office and use my fingernail to find the tender points and track the needle down my nail so that I could inject my upper neck. That's dangerous, pretty bad. It's gone. Completely gone. And I noticed that if I do eat something that might have something in it that I don't agree with, it comes back, and it comes back with a vengeance. So for me, carnivore was all about the health gains.
Yeah. And did you find any pushback from your sort of colleagues? I know your husband was supportive, obviously. What about the colleagues?
It's interesting how many colleagues I've actually influenced or converted, if you would, a number of them. And I think it's because the way that I led with it wasn't that, hey, you should absolutely do this and everything that you're doing is wrong. It's, hey, this produced really meaningful results for me. This is why. And should you feel the need to experiment, I'm here if you have questions. And I think that was ultimately the best approach to take, because nobody likes a couple things. Nobody likes somebody preaching at them, and nobody likes feeling that what they've been doing for their whole lives is wrong. Nobody likes that. So if we take away those variables, it's more likely that we're going to be able to actually influence change in another person. And people do really like that see to believe sort of thing. And this actually has a that actually has a basis in neurology. We have these things in our mind or in our brain called mirror neurons. And what it means is if we see somebody else that we can identify with in some way, shape, or form, whether we're both females or both doctors, we both have a similar hair color, something, you realize that if it's possible for them, it's also possible for me subconsciously. So it becomes a lot easier to again move forward with that.
Yeah, the mirror neurons is something I'm really interested in. I just want to just dial back to you noticing Paul Saladino had his name there, but I think it is quite amusing that you've got Salad, you've got Ken Berry, and you've got Sean Baker, and and it's basically all meat. I think your list of things that got better: skin issues, anxiety, IBS, and joint pain, severe joint pain, is pretty much what I hear from virtually every success story. But it's interesting also that two things you said there. One was that you had all this stuff for many years and you had access to all these other cures, and they work, but not to the degree that Carnivore works. And I really loved what you said about it seems permanent, but I've still got my life to live. Because, yeah, I think people still change. But for me, I mean, I just interviewed someone who's been doing Carnivore 40 years, someone doing 22, someone doing 14. It does feel permanent for me. I mean, I did my 4-year carniversary yesterday, and I haven't been to the doctor for so long. I just feel it's pretty permanent. One thing that we spoke about before we started recording is the fact you're currently pregnant. You mentioned your first child in 2017, a daughter. You're pregnant now. How does being Carnivore, how does that affect it, or did you just carry on as normal?
Gosh, it's so funny because my husband actually did an interview with Steak and Butter gal Bella, probably a month or two before I actually found out I was pregnant. And in that interview, I was like, you know what? I'd have no problem being carnivore. Like, I think it's the best. It's super great. And then, of course, because the life, universe, God, whatever you choose to believe in, decides it has a sense of humor, it gave me the worst meat aversion you could possibly think of. It was so, I mean, actually, I have a YouTube video that I'm planning to do. Depending on when this goes live, I'll be able to give you the link, because I'm planning to record it in the next couple of days, where I actually walk through everything that I've done this pregnancy, diet-wise, supplement-wise, symptom-wise, everything from basically the start until now, which I'm 26 weeks. But it was really, really bad meat aversion in the beginning. And I remember it was one day, because I basically ate a ribeye rare with butter for lunch every single day. My husband would grill it on our auto grill for me in the morning, for like during breakfast time. Bless him, he's amazing. And then I would take it to my office. I had a little convection oven in there. I would put it in there like under broil for a few minutes just to get that butter nice and melted. And then I would eat that for lunch. And I remember I was sitting there, it's January 21st. I remember because I have the Uber Eats order in my phone so I could see the first day. And I looked at my steak and I was like, I cannot eat this. Like, and literally ribeye. It was a ribeye with butter. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was like the love of my life next to my husband. And it was no longer appetizing to me. So I got on my phone and all I wanted was sashimi. Like, I just wanted fish. Like, and I think that there's an intelligence to our cravings and to the things that our body's going for, because, well, you need a lot of fuel. You need a lot of fat. You need a lot of protein to grow these babies. And at that point, I really hadn't had a lot of fish for like that previous year. I was doing, again, a lot of ribeye, a lot of ground beef, bacon, eggs. We would do the occasional seafood. We did a lot of oysters, but really no like salmon or anything like that. So ordered a crap ton of some salmon, some yellowtail, and went to town on that. And that was great. And that was really well for me. And then, of course, things like the morning sickness kind of kicked in. I was really, really nauseous most mornings. So I wasn't really eating a lot of breakfast, and just kind of went on and on with various things that happened. We went to we went to Turkey and Egypt, and we ended up both catching COVID at the tail end of that trip, which gave me terrible changes to my taste and smell. Eggs tasted like rubber. Bacon was like the smell of burning cigarettes. Like, it was really rough. My meat aversion was still there. So I was really stuck with a lot of things that I could eat. I was able to do dairy. I started using the Equip protein powders, because I was like, there's really nothing else that I can get in at this point. It was It was a lot. But so eventually all of those things changed, and second trimester came around. It became a lot easier. I still have meat aversion, but the way that I'm able to, we'll say, I guess, circumvent that is I have to have some degree of like a condiment or something to kind of mask that taste. So what I started doing was making like ground beef bowls. So I would make what I call like my deconstructed meatball, where I would just get ground beef. My dad, he would make me, when he was here watching my kids, when we were on our vacation, he cooked me a whole bunch of homemade pasta sauce, no spices, no sugar, just like slow cooked for hours, just with like the meat in it for the flavor. So I tolerate that just fine. I would put a couple tablespoons over top of that, some Parmesan cheese, put that in the oven, let it crisp up. Beautiful. I would make deconstructed burger bowls with like a small amount of fermented pickles, because I can't eat regular pickles or cucumbers. Those still mess me up. But fermented pickles, I can do like half of one and it's enough for a flavor. I would put like a small amount of the like, it's a really clean mayo. I'm forgetting the brand of it now. I think it's Primal Kitchen. And some like shredded cheese on that too. I would make taco bowls with shredded cheese and some sour cream. And that was what I was really into for probably a solid 2, almost 3 months, just making a lot of those. I eventually got my smell and taste back. Bacon and eggs are back on the menu. Still doing some of the equipped shakes, because some days I'm just like, maybe not. And then the last month, I've been really into barbecue meats. So a lot of brisket and ribs. And it's crazy. The other day, I was like craving it so much, so heavily. I, by myself, in one sitting, I ate half a rack of ribs and about half a pound of brisket. Just one sitting. It was a hefty amount of food, like even for me. And I laugh because then, I mean, the cravings really are real for things that your body needs. Clearly, there was some sort of growth happening where my body's like, yep, you need this fat, you need this protein, take it in. And then the next day, I actually wasn't even hungry until about 2:00. So fed me, kept me full, and I was able to, really kind of utilize that fuel. But I would say my overall diet has been, we'll say 80 to 90% pure carnivore, minus like the tiny little bits of other things just to be able to get it down. And it's ultimately not because I'm here sitting to, trying to adhere to dogmatic rules, but because I feel terrible eating anything else. And I don't want that. I still have, work to show up for, family to show up for, myself. Like I'm still growing this baby. But for me, it's all about, okay, how do I feel my best? Carbs, I feel terrible on. So I really do try to avoid them.
Yes, that's brilliant. A fantastic full answer. Thanks for that. So your first child was in 2017. Has that child been carnivore all the way through?
No. So I was pregnant with her when I was in 2017. She was actually born January of 2018. So right at the beginning. And she was born into when we were like, we'll call it plant heavy paleo. So we still weren't eating, we really didn't eat gluten, a lot of grains, or, even a lot of dairy, minus some cheese here and there. And so she kind of grew up with the like packaged healthy foods. We'll call them foods, even though, they're not all that healthy. It's crazy what you look back on now. I'm sure a lot of your interviewees and stuff say this, or just a lot of people in carnivore space, but when you look back at the decisions that you're making, you're like, of course, this was silly. But so she grew up kind of on that stuff. So she ate vegetables, she ate packaged things, but she still did eat a lot of the actual healthy stuff. Like we never shied away from meat. We always had red meat at least a couple times a week, if not more. But we did also eat chicken, and we had, eggs and all that stuff, but it would accompany broccoli and Brussels sprouts and sweet potatoes and all those other things. So she was a tougher transition when we actually switched, and we switched right at the beginning, kind of like December, January of 2021, 2022, because it was actually around Thanksgiving of 2021 where my husband kind of like went through his things. So after that switch, she still has some resistance to it. She has a sweet tooth for sure that we're really trying to curb, but she's also at an age now where the understanding that she has as far as being healthy and what food fuels her to grow big and strong. That's how how we position it, right? We want you to grow big and strong. And what makes her feel good? And we've really tried to make her understand, like, oh, you ate that. That's why your tummy hurts now. Or you just ate this, and this is why you're feeling tired, or you want to take a nap, or you don't have the energy to go play. And she's really made a lot of good connections with that, which we're very, very happy for, because, the other side to that is we also don't want to raise kids with eating disorders, or we don't want to like it becomes this fine line between these really intense rules that maybe they're going to rebel against once they're old enough. And you really don't want that, right? Like I tell people, I'm not necessarily raising children, I'm raising adults. And I want them to be able to make these choices as an adult with what we're teaching now and the example that we're setting. So, this is really funny. My husband, so there's this like McDonald's down the street from us that's like, we'll call it a bougie McDonald's. Like it has a really fancy play place. And we always drive past it to get to our house. And our kids are always like, can we go play? Can we go play? And finally, one day, my husband was like, all right, I'm going to take you and we'll go play at the McDonald's. And this was my daughter's first time seeing overweight children. And it was a really great learning moment because he was actually able to take that and be like, hey, so there's a reason that this happens. It's because they're eating unhealthy food. It's because they eat the stuff from places like McDonald's, pending you're not just getting a plain quarter pounder burger, for convenience. And she really understood that. And that was, she still talks about that she doesn't want to be like those unhealthy kids because they weren't able to fully play in the play place. And it's not just about the aesthetic part of it. It's like, you can tell that these kids are not the healthiest that they could be. So she's been fun. Now, our son, on the other hand, he started to be carnivore. Well, we'll say carnivore as a baby, because he was about 1 year old when we transitioned. So at that point, he had just done random, other foods, but mostly breastfed. And this kid has like a true carnivore palate. He will ask for just plain ground beef for breakfast, plain ground beef for lunch. He will gnaw on ribs. Like it is the coolest thing to see. We've literally seen him choose the meat over, say, a piece of fruit. It's awesome. And I don't know I think it's Dr. Anthony Chaffee. He had an interview one time where he talked about how carnivore kids generally have bigger heads and really good teeth. This kid's head is massive. It's like the size of my 5-year-old's, and he's 2. And he's got the most perfect teeth you've ever seen. Like they look like he's had braces. It's phenomenal. He started talking earlier than our daughter did. He was putting full sentences together before. It's just been really incredible to see the differences and just to see how he has grown based on this diet.
That's brilliant, actually. And so you've got this little I know you're not doing it as an experiment, they're your children, but you have that experiment. I mean, you see the difference that nutrition's made. I'm British, I've got terrible teeth, and I'm very interested in that subject, actually, that, in our ancestors had bigger jaws, they didn't have congested teeth, they had, anyway, I don't want to get too much into that, but also just the visual, it's not fat shaming when you say there's some overweight children, and if you've never seen overweight children before, you probably don't want to be like that. If you can't play, if it restricts your movement as a child and you can't go in the play area, that's not shaming, that's a practicality, isn't it? It's like I want to be able to play in this thing, and the only way to do that is to not be overweight. So I think that's pretty interesting. So I think you've already answered my next question, would be that your next child, I'm assuming you're going to raise as a carnivore.
Yep, that's the plan. So I'm really big into breastfeeding. I think it's super important. I understand that there are some moms that can't do it for whatever reasons, but for me, it's always been a priority. But, I don't want my choices to make somebody else feel like theirs are different, but it's always been, again, something that I really, really, really double down on. So my goal with my children is always about 2 years. With my son, we went about 23 months, and with my daughter, we went about 25 months, and it was, or actually 26, closer to 26. So again, right around 2 years. And what that means is that they're not exclusively breastfed for those 2 years, because what we also do with that is we could do something called baby-led weaning, which is when the baby is starting to show interest in what you're eating, you give them small amounts of that, obviously in a way that is going to be safe, whether they have teeth or not, if they can chew it, swallow it. So could mean pre-chewing it. You're giving them something really, really small that, if they swallowed it whole, it's not that big of a deal, or something really, really big that they're for sure not going to actually put in their mouth, like a rib bone. And this has worked really well for us with both kids, even though their, ultimate endpoint has been different. So we're planning to do the same thing. So breastfeeding until they start to show interest. Once they start showing interest, feeding them what we're eating, which is obviously going to be carnivore. So different types of meats, whatnot. We'll probably still include some fruit because right now our children still do eat fruit. It's just easy snacks to have in the house. Kids are they burn through a lot of energy. And to have like that much meat consistently available where they even want to eat it, I also believe that children are very instinctual with what they need energy-wise. And I don't think that feeding kids carbohydrates is necessarily bad because they're going to utilize that energy. I think it starts to be bad when you're only feeding them carbs or only feeding them seed oils or only feeding them the bad fats. But I think that carbs for children in the context of everything else being pretty dialed in isn't necessarily harmful and does feed their very, very high energy needs. I mean, our kids are super active. My husband takes them to the gym pretty much every morning when he goes to work out, and they play in their play area there, which is a really nice play area, but they're burning energy there. And then once they're home, we live in Arizona, it's nice out pretty much all the time. So they're bike riding, they're going scootering, they're playing in the pool, they're outside most of the day doing these activities. So it's always just like high energy. So fruit's great for feeding that. And then of course they do have their like structured meals. So breakfast, it depends on the day. We usually do like breakfast bowls. My daughter loves doing eggs, bacon, goat cheese, and like half or a quarter of an avocado. And then my son, he has the same thing, or without the avocado. He doesn't like avocado. It's so interesting. He doesn't have a taste for it. Or sometimes he'll just want plain ground beef with like a small amount of ketchup on it. And then lunch is usually whatever we're eating. So if my husband's cooking up, like he'll get like a really big piece of salmon, he'll cook the whole thing. They'll eat that. They'll eat, again, ground beef, whatever it is that we're brisket, ribs, all that good stuff. Same thing for dinner. They eat what we eat. And then snack wise, again, we provide fruit. We also provide like little pieces of cheese. Like we get these little tiny mozzarella balls that they like. They like eating carnivore crisps, biltong, any of that is kind of like fair game in our house for them.
What about dairy? I know about breastfeeding, but what about dairy?
So it's interesting. I can do dairy just fine. And actually carnivore got me back the ability to eat dairy. Mm-hmm. I wasn't able to eat it before. My husband, on the other hand, has the gene for lactose intolerance. So he doesn't really do well with it, but he might have it once in a while because if I'm eating it and it looks good, he's like hard to resist. But we think our daughter has his lactose intolerance gene because anytime she does eat dairy, stools aren't that great. So we try not to give them a lot of it, but we also don't withhold it. They actually both do fine with yogurt, and they really just enjoy plain full fat yogurt. We will give them raw milk sometimes. We usually have raw kefir in the house. We are able to get those from our local Sprouts without any issues, or they're pretty much all the time, which is nice. But otherwise, we don't. It's more of like a food accessory, if you will, versus a main food group in our house.
Fantastic. So I'm going to just get away from the children now and go a little bit broader, because you're interested in bloods. I'm a qualified phlebotomist. I'm interested in bloods. And one of the things that comes up every so often, two-part question here, is low folate for the general population that are carnivore, keto, low carb, not so much, low folate, but without any presentations. So I want your views on what you think about, is that a problem? And the other thing is, when you're pregnant, is low folate more of a problem, or is there no issue at all?
Yeah, in the general population, low folate doesn't always have a typical presentation symptom-wise. And a lot of the time it can be underlying stuff that maybe you're not paying attention to, like how your body handles inflammation. And sometimes that can actually take months and months and months to build up to any sort of physical symptoms that might manifest. So I don't think that it is necessarily immediately diagnostic, but I don't think that it's something to sit in for long periods of time, because ultimately you still need folate to run very important pathways in your body, like how your body detoxes or how your body produces energy. And a lot of the time I do see the low folate accompanying people who have possibly the MTHFR defect, or they do have it for sure. But then again, it can also accompany things like elevated homocysteine, which is an inflammatory marker, elevated HSCRP, which is another inflammatory marker. And then there's almost always a correlation too between somebody who has elevated ferritin and elevated LDL, and if they have the low folate, because of how it all fits into that picture. So a lot of the time people will develop the low folate on carnivore because they aren't eating food sources that are really, really rich in it. One of the best sources actually is liver. So if that was something that, people did see, I would say liver would be a really great choice to kind of add that back in, or just simply supplement with an active version of it, which the LMTHF, methyl tetrahydrofolate, it's so obnoxious to say stuff like that. But that's going to be the active form, best absorbed. With women who are wanting to become pregnant or pregnant, I do think that paying attention to your levels really matters, because this is one of the nutrients that's going to help build the neural tube of your developing baby. It's super, super important. And what bothers me so much is in the traditional medical model, they push folic acid, which is the inactive form. It doesn't really do anything, and it can cause more harm than good, especially if the mom has that MTHFR defect. So again, this is where I really love the phrase test, don't guess, because a lot of the time you can just get these levels tested. And your provider can screen for them. There's ways that you can order these tests online for yourself, but I personally think that it's more worth it to just have that data.
Yeah, brilliant answer. That's great. So I'm going to go even broader now with some common questions, because, I've got a doctor in the house. People like to ask these questions of doctors, if you don't mind. Real basic one to start with. What do you think are the benefits of the carnivore diet?
Oh, this is interesting to think about, because obviously I've had my own personal experiences. I've actually had the pleasure of working with, at this point, dozens of carnivore patients, and I've seen their changes. Now, there's a built-in bias to that, because the people who are also doing really, really great on carnivore and don't need a doctor's help aren't coming to necessarily see me, but there still is people on carnivore that are still trying to work through some health issues that they want help for. I think number one, the best thing, it's two parts. One, it's a really great elimination diet. You eliminate pretty much anything that can be problematic, which is important, because then should you decide, you want to start revisiting food items after you've achieved the healing that you want, you can do that very systematically and very purposefully to actually figure out, okay, what doesn't agree with my system as an individual. The other side to that is that the nutrient density in the carnivore diet is so powerful, and it can actually help. So that's how I think we can correct a lot of underlying issues. A lot of the people on a standard American diet, eating a lot of plants or a lot of the anti-nutrients, you put yourself into pretty severe nutrient deficiencies with a lot of the essential nutrients that we need on a daily basis. So a lot of the vitamins, a lot of the minerals, even essential fatty acids like your EPA, your DHA. And when you start eating this way, you actually start to eat in such an abundance that you're able to not only maintain your daily intake of those nutrients, but you're finally able to eat in a way that repletes all the stuff that's been depleted over years. Of course, this takes time. I always kind of laugh a little bit when people are like, I've been doing carnivore for a few weeks and I don't really see any changes. And I'm like, it takes time. My general rule for healing, or timeline of healing, is that for every year that you've been sick, you need to give yourself at least 1 month of ideal conditions in order to heal. So if you've been sick, like me, my gut issues for 2+ decades, at least, like that's as far back as I could remember, I've got to give myself probably 2 years. I'm only about 1.5 years into this carnivore journey myself. And while that's just why I said I don't like the permanence is something that I'm going for, but I know there's still healing to be done, because it's not fast. So we have to really make sure we're giving ourselves the time.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And thanks for adding the time frame, because that is the biggest problem I have, because for some people it's a magic wand and they get a lot of traction. They go onto Instagram and everyone expects that magic wand effect. I mean, and when it happens, I've had it with quite a few clients, off their diabetic meds in 7 weeks and stuff like that. Yeah. And it is amazing. Of course, you want to shout it from the rooftops. But when you then have your next diabetic person come in, or I saw that video of your person you coached, it was 7 weeks. Is it going to be 7 weeks for me? It's like, no, we're all different. But anyway, that's a great answer. Thanks for that. A really simple one. What if I go carnivore? I've heard that you get a lot of constipation. Is this true? And if I do get constipated, how can I relieve it?
Oh, goodness. Constipation, I think we need to actually define what that means, because constipation usually means a stool that is difficult to pass and or infrequent. Now, carnivore, you can definitely have quote unquote constipation, especially if you aren't eating enough fat to really help that move through. Most of the time, though, we see the opposite happen, at least initially. Usually initially, we actually see more diarrhea and more, the inability to trust a fart, so to speak. Because things just, you remove the roadblocks, which is all the fiber that you've been taking in, and things just kind of move a lot faster than your system is normally used to transiting. The other aspect to that is when you've been carnivore for a while, you're really only eating these foods that your body can take in very readily, you produce less waste, which means there can be an infrequency to your stool that isn't necessarily constipation, because when you do have it, it's easy to pass. Now, should you be accompanied with other symptoms like really intense gas, bloating, blood in the stool, strange colored stools, that's when I would say, okay, maybe work with somebody to actually start to investigate that, because those aren't normal. But an infrequent stool that is still easy to pass is not necessarily constipation, nor a concern when you've been on carnivore for a decent amount of time.
Thank you for that. That's a great one. Now, a big question. This is possibly the toughest one. Will red meat give me colon cancer?
It's actually, so when people ask these questions about will this way produce this negative symptom, I always kind of flip it back, which is, well, did you ask your last doctor if the seed oils will cause cancer, or the excess sugar will cause diabetes, or on and on and on? Because these same people, this is most of the time, and no shade, but a lot of time, the people that are asking these questions about the dangers of these very natural foods have no issues eating the processed crap that has been around for a blip in our history compared to all these foods that have been around for hundreds, thousands, whatever you want to believe it as far as the history of the world goes, millions of years that have sustained humans. So do I think that it's inherently going to cause colon cancer? Absolutely not. Do I think that people could have conditions that predispose them to develop it, that they may still possibly develop despite making these changes? Yes, that is always a possibility, because it's not just food that impacts our health. It's also our stress levels, our environment, the other toxins we're exposed to, whether it's mold, heavy metals, environmental toxins like glyphosate. These things can be far, far, far greater as a predictor of your health outcomes than just eating red meat. I think it's silly to kind of distill one health outcome down to one particular thing, unless, of course, it's something like diabetes, where we know there is an exact causation with, say, excess sugar and development of that disease.
That's a brilliant answer. And that tends to be how I answer that question, because there's that sort of common thing that you see online. Now I'm eating carnivore, everyone's worried about what I eat. When I had pizza, crisps, Coke, nobody gave me another look. And I think that's it. Like you say, it's obviously healthy, natural food, I think. Anyway, right. Next question. You ready? Will all that saturated fat raise my LDL and give me a heart condition?
This question should be answered by the idea that, why is LDL only always pathologic in the model that we're considering? And this is important because LDL in and of itself is not causative to an end result. It's usually something that it elevates in response to something. And you have to figure out what that trigger was initially to be able to determine whether LDL is like nefarious or doing something bad, or if it's behaving badly. And again, it's part of the picture. Beyond just LDL, you actually have other subtypes like your oxidative LDL or your small density LDL. And looking at those molecules, in addition to the other parts of the picture, like how are your triglycerides? How's your HDL? How's your HSCRP? How are your cardiac markers? These things, I think, give a far greater picture than just that one number in isolation, because it truly is meaningless by itself, honestly. And even if a person is concerned about whether or not they're going to develop heart disease, you should absolutely get further testing, get a coronary calcium scan, do a stress test, do an EKG, do something else that's going to give you, again, the complete picture beyond just the LDL, because while it can be a useful marker initially, it's only to kind of point you in the direction of where else you need to look. It's not a final destination, and it's not causative.
Excellent. Okay. You ready for two more questions? Two really simple ones now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Am I not going to miss out on lots of nutrients because I'm having no vegetables?
No. And it's crazy because I used to think that I used to literally aim for 10 different plants every single day, whether it was in a salad or sides to my meals. And because I thought that this is where all the dense nutrients were. And then I started really doing some comparisons. And not only are the nutrients in less amounts, the quantity that you would have to eat to get the equivalent in something like, say, a steak or even eggs is way more than most people could actually take in and digest on a regular basis. But most of them aren't even in the bioavailable forms that our body needs to be able to utilize readily. So no, you aren't going to miss out on anything with vegetables. Now, that doesn't mean that if you don't want to use it as like a garnish or just like something for flavor, if like you're really, really into that, not telling you not to do it, but it's certainly not a need.
Excellent. And finally, do you need to add additional fats and track your macros to make the most out of carnivore?
I think that can be helpful for some people initially as they're learning things. I don't think it's necessary. I think the goal should be to actually get in tune with your body. What I've realized being in clinical practice is that a lot of people don't actually live in their bodies. They aren't aware of the sensations, the feelings, how certain things affect them until they've actually made some sort of shift and they're in a dramatically different place. And with that, again, I think it's important because once you start eating this way, you will learn things like what it means to be hungry, what it means to be full, what you feel when you want a certain type of food. Like I told you the other day, I ate a lot of meat and fat in one sitting, must have been going through some sort of, baby growth at that point. But again, I wasn't hungry until 2:00 the next day. I didn't feel like I needed to eat. Now, some people will argue, oh, you have to eat breakfast, you have to do this, whatever. I've personally found, again, this is just me, that if I'm listening to my hunger cues, I am better at nourishing my body than actually just sticking to some sort of arbitrary timeline. Like, oh, I have to eat breakfast, I have to eat lunch, I have to eat dinner. No, I eat when I'm hungry and I eat what feels good to me at the time. Sometimes that really is just me actually taking a chunk of butter and eating it because I'm like, yep, I need that fat. So that can be, again, useful. I don't think, again, not necessary. But if people need to track, at least initially, to start to learn what they're eating and how it's working with themselves, go for it. But if it's causing more difficulty, more stress than benefit, stop it. Just eat instinctually as best you can.
And again, a beautiful answer. For people listening in, if you're interested in speaking to Dr. Solt, all the links are in the description. You don't have to look it up. You can just go in the description, click, and you can contact her. And I'm going to ask the last question, which I'm beginning to ask every single person that comes on. Someone is sitting on the fence. They're not sure whether to eat carnivore or not. What advice would you give them to try and persuade them to maybe give it a go?
This is easy. It's what I tell people all the time. Give it 30 days. You can always go back. Like kale will always be there to embrace you. You're never good. Like there's no shortage of these food items in existence right now. We are not in an apocalypse. This is not the last cake on planet Earth. You can always go back. And you're certainly not going to cause any damage, we'll say quote unquote damage, in 30 days. Take it month at a time. And who knows, you might just change your life in the best way possible.
Wow, that was really interesting. I love that guest. Absolutely amazing. If you like stuff like that, don't forget to look at this video next. And while you're at it, look in the description, download the Carnivore Experience app.